What are you learning that will inform the huge environment or the huge investment we made in persistent cyber training environments? Given the speed of technology changes, what skill sets need to be adjusted? What's the best mix now as we look at this professional military force we've created of not just military forces, but civilian and contractor forces? And then are we best leveraging our Guard and Reserve skills, and what might we do differently? And most importantly, probably, as I've heard it echoed several times this morning, what's it take to not just recruit, but to retain the right talent? And given our new strategies in cyber ops, what adjustments are needed for the cyber mission force? So there's a couple of questions for you to think about. I would ask each of you to send at least one in now, and more as they speak, because we're going to be here till 13:30, whether you want to be or not. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists who can answer all these questions and many more. First, I'd like to introduce Brigadier General Rick Engel, the Deputy Commanding General for Operations, U.S. Army Cyber Command, Special Forces officer with extensive operational experience, engaged in Army cyber missions and looking at what's needed to support cyber tactical operations, and helping the Army think its way through what it means to be information warfare versus cyber, or a concept much broader than SEMA. Next to Rick is Colonel Desmond Reed, the commanding officer of the Marine Corps Cyberspace Warfare Group. He's responsible for the training, organizing, and equipment of cyber forces in the Marines, as well as managing their readiness of the cyber mission force. He brings a wide range of operational experience as both a comms officer and a cyber officer. Finally, on the far end, Brigadier General Tim Lunderman, Air National Guard, Assistant to the Commander, 24th Air Force and Air Force's Cyber, provides support to the Commander on behalf of the Air National Guard for providing trained and ready cyber forces, and supports the mission to operate and defend U.S. Air Force networks. It's great to have the three of you here and to see all of you again. I look forward to the discussion. So with that, let's get started. I'll turn right to General Engel for your comments, please.
Okay, sir. Thanks. Everybody hear me? Good. Well, thank you to AFCEA for having us today. As important, thank you for bringing together the community to get after and talk about some of the challenges we have. You've heard it a number of times. Cyber is absolutely a team sport, and the challenges that we face, they're well beyond, for us, the department. These are national challenges, and it's going to take all of us together to solve them. Thanks to Augusta and the surrounding area for always your support of Fort Gordon. As you may know, hopefully you do, Army Cyber Command will be moving down here in the summer of 2020, and we look forward to establishing a stronger relationship with the community. I do have a confession to make. I don't play with a Raspberry Pi in my spare time. I know that may surprise some of you, not unless it's the pie that you like to eat. If that's the case, I'm all in. But it is my honor to represent the 19,000 teammates in Army Cyber that are conducting offensive cyber operations, that are operating, securing, and defending our networks. They're conducting electronic warfare and information operations every single day on behalf of this nation. And it's been talked about, and I'll discuss it a little bit, but a team that is engaged with our adversary in cyberspace 24/7, 365. So I'm going to hit 4 quick topics this morning. And if you'd like to dig into those any deeper, feel free during the question and answer. And I'll try to be brief with my comments here. But they really represent our challenges, our opportunities, and then a couple areas where we're going as a command in the future. So the first one, it talks about strategic concept. And it's been mentioned a couple different times, but the strategic reality now is our adversaries are achieving positional advantage, in some cases national objectives, and eroding our elements of national power in the competition space short of war without triggering our national security mechanisms. A lot of that is happening in and through cyberspace. And because of such, we need to change how we're operating as a force. General Nakasone has talked about it. He'll talk about it most recently in a future Joint Force article. But it talks about changing our strategic concept. The force that we built was a response force, so that the Cyber Mission Force was intended to respond to threats. Today, it needs to be a persistently engaged force, like we talked about, 24/7, 365, defending forward, taking the initiative in cyberspace where we haven't done so before. And what does that mean for us as a service? That significantly alters what we need to do from a Title X perspective, our responsibility to man, train, and equip. It's causing us to look at our task organization. It's causing us to take a look at our training models. It's causing us to look at how are the operational requirements actually driving the mission essential tasks for which we are measuring readiness against. And those are some pretty significant challenges, but they're also opportunities because they're informed from 3 years of solid repetitions. And so now we can actually train as we fight, and it will make us better in the end. Secondly, I'd like to talk about General Fogarty's vision to be the last Army cyber commander. That's not because he's going to get fired. Please, nobody walk out of here and take it that way. But it's a recognition. It's a recognition of the importance of all of the things that we do at Army Cyber. If you look at the attack on our elections, a lot of the times that's people talk about it as a cyber attack. And while a lot of that happened inside of cyberspace, a large portion of that was an information operation attack. It was an understanding of our culture, and it was information operations targeted at our tribes, our fracture points, to incite those, creates polarity. Right? So it's a recognition that we need to be involved in this space, and that's a national issue all the way down to the tactical. So from a tactical perspective, as someone who spent the last 17 years fighting the global war on terrorism, or whatever you want to call it, getting after violent extremist organizations, I will tell you that we can't kill our way out of that problem. I haven't learned a whole lot, but I've learned that. We can provide time and space for other elements of national power to take hold, but we can't kill our way out of it. There's not a kinetic solution. I would offer what we need is a better message that we can help our partners send. It doesn't necessarily have to come from us, but we can help facilitate that. Okay? And that's an information operation. So it's General Fogarty's intent, to be the last Army cyber commander, but be the first Army information warfare commander. And don't take that name in blood. It's not set in stone yet, but it's what we're looking at, and it's a recognition that we are much more than just cyber. Okay? It's a recognition that the importance of cyber, electronic warfare, and information, and the ability to synchronize those and the other IRCs in time and space in support of the maneuver commander. And that's our vision. Third thing I'd like to talk about is our cyber support. And again, when I say cyber now, a lot of these things were built with cyber as the coin term, but eventually we'd like to see those go to information warfare or whatever the terminology we settle on. But it's a cyber support to our core and below formations. We've done a significant and I would say great job of building a capability at the national level to achieve cyber effects. Okay? What we have not done yet inside the Army is taken that same capability and be able to apply it in support of maneuver commanders at the core and below. And that's what our focus is now. So we're going to put cells that have information operations, electronic warfare, and cyber at the brigade, at the division, and at the core level to be able to synchronize those capabilities in the other IRCs. In addition to that, we're going to augment them, what we're calling an expeditionary cyber team. Okay? That will embed inside a brigade combat team that will have reach back to one of our mission operations centers that can bring that same high-end, exquisite defensive and offensive cyber capability down to the BCT level. And that will be a significant push as we move forward into 19 and beyond. And then finally, people. Now, if you've heard me talk before, I don't ever sit at a panel like this without talking about people. Because at the end of the day, that is our most precious resource. That's what makes us special. The technology is great, but if you don't have the people, technology won't matter. Right? There's been a lot of discussion about, how do we recruit, assess, select, train, educate, and develop a a world-class workforce. We have many of the same challenges, but it's not all bad. Our workforce right now is fairly healthy. We are above the authorizations that we have for the Army for our 17 series or our cyber folks. And that's a good news story. For the first time, we had more West Point cadets that wanted to basic branch cyber than we had slots available. That's just one vignette, one commissioning source, but it does give you an idea that there's a demand inside our force to come and be part of this team. And that's a good news story. It also means we can be a little bit more selective on the folks that we bring in. Right? The challenge has been stated before. How do you retain that talent? That is our most significant challenge. Okay? Our retention rates for our high demand, low density MOSs are as high as our recruitment rate, and that's not going to get it done. The department has been great, as well as Congress, about giving us some of the tools that we need to be able to keep those folks on the team, but it remains a challenge and something that we're going to be squarely focused on. And with that, sir, I'll pause and pass it on to Desmond.
Let me, before I give it to Desmond, see how quick you were to get off the spot. A lot of great changes there. Let me ask you to come back when we're done to talk a little bit in terms of what you see and think might be potential changes to training and education, as well as skill sets when you think your way through IW, persistent engagement, and CSCB. And just ask what it is that industry and academia may be thinking about now. When we did Division 21, we were pretty far behind. We were writing the TTPs with nothing to go behind it as we were learning. So if we think we're headed in that direction, what is it that we might need to get in front of now so that we're not catching up after the fact? So that's really what I'll let you think about a little bit.
Okay.
Desmond, please.
Sure. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to, on behalf of General Glavy and Mr. Kendrick, our Executive Director, to tell a little bit about the Marine Corps story and a little bit about what we're doing today and where we're heading in the future, and also to identify some of the challenges and opportunities that we have, and some of the help that we need from this, I guess, crowd as well. I'm going to start a little bit from big to small and kind of work my way forward from here, but I want to start with just a quick story to get us started. So when I came into Marine Corps as a second lieutenant, I went to Comm Officer School in 29 Palms. If you haven't been there, it's a great place to go visit. And then I got to go back and live there for a while too, so that was great with then Colonel Warlick. But the technology that we used at the time was old, I'd say. The radios that we used, the wire systems that we used, those things have been in place for decades worth of time that we employed those capabilities. Fast forward another 7 or 8 years when I did go back to 29 Palms, and we had new systems, and we were working towards TriTac back in those days, but again, new systems that we had, and they lasted a little bit less time on deck that we were able to employ those. Today, the technology moves in months, not years, not decades. And so from a training perspective, it's something that we've had to take on and start to think about. Now, I put that kind of change in the timeline in up front because what I want to articulate is my boss has to figure out not just how to deal with the change of the technology, which is important, and the changes in the mission, but also the changes with the adversary. And so we look at this strategic vision from the Secretary and from General Nakasone, who says, persistent engagement, defend forward, we get it, and we want to increase the lethality of our force. My commander says that all the time. How do we do that in an environment that is changing as fast as it is, and our adversaries who are adapting and exploiting the changes in those technologies and get advantage in that environment all the time, because we're not pulling off the mission in order to execute training and recocking our systems. The Navy Marine Corps model of that we typically have for deployments don't work for us. 6 months of training, 6, 7, 8 months of deployment, and then we come back and kind of retool, rearm, refuel, and get back out. That doesn't work. And so we just need a different idea, a different model in this persistently engaged force. So with that, that has a significant impact on the way that we think about readiness. What does readiness mean? When you can't pull out to build readiness back up so you can employ your force and use that readiness as we typically have done with other forces in other domains. The service side has recognized, the Commandant Marine Corps a couple of years ago recognized the challenges that we face in the information space and identified a need to build professionals who are doing this and units that could take these capabilities forward. And so he developed a MEF, Marine Expeditionary Force Information Group, an 06 level command at each of our MEFs that allow us to bring together many of these capabilities, small but there. Amongst those is a defensive cyberspace capability, and eventually we'll get to an offensive capability as well. And those get integrated by that MiG commander. And we are building that capability today. So again, at the service level, we're starting to build in this cyber capability at the tactical level. But what we see is the need to enable those organizations and tie them back to what we're doing at the joint side. And so what my organization has done is actually we've put in the seeds, the seed corn for those organizations by taking the experienced personnel that we've had and to push them out. It's hard to grow cyber expertise. It's difficult to do. I'm not telling anybody anything new, but I think that what we've learned over the last several years of building the cyber mission force, and now as we're transitioning to sustaining the readiness of that force, we've learned some real lessons about what works, what doesn't work, and the kind of things that we're going to have to do in order to sustain that force while they remain on mission. The first thing really is we've got to recruit the right kinds of folks. Not everybody's going to be a cyber professional. We just can't get there from here, particularly for our most high demand, low density skill sets. We have to be very, very careful about who we're choosing. And we don't want to just throw people against the wall and see where they stick. It's demoralizing for them. It's not good for the organization. And so we're looking for ways, for example, to better screen and assess folks, bring them in, and then get them on into the school's high-density training that they require in order to get on mission. We also realize that while we need a focused high-density training at the beginning, as the mission changes, the adversary changes, and the technology changes, we also need to have episodic training along the way. But I can't pull full teams off the mission in order to do that. So we need solutions in how we make that training model, a different training model, work for us. And so we're working through some of how we do that. And we think that experience and that training work together to make them better over time. We want to use the experience of our masters, our journeymen, to then help us to get better with our younger, less experienced folks, but also to help us to learn the right lessons and incorporate the right lessons into our training as we move forward. The last thing I'll speak of here at this point is we have developed within the Marine Corps in this past year a new occupational field for cyberspace operations, and that's been one of the ways that we're trying to, one, bring in the right folks, the right talent, but also to retain that. Time will tell. We're working real hard at getting it stood up and making the right kinds of decisions and investments so that series of MOSs will work. And we've learned some lessons in looking at some of our partners. But I would also say, as one point here, in order to make that work, we understand that we're going to have many partners to help us to train that force, to help us to get the right specific technical skill sets built. And some of those partners are with other schoolhouses. The Marine Corps is not going to establish a large-scale center of excellence for cyberspace operations. I think is what it boils down to, as we have the Cyber Mission Force and use that model to export some of the lessons that we have learned. But we're going to partner with the other services and leverage their investments and leverage their expertise to help us along. We also are going to partner and have been partnering with academia and with industry to move us forward, and partnering with other agencies within the government. But what we've seen is getting the right talent up front has been really important for us to build on that foundation to get us the folks that we need. And leveraging those partnerships have also helped us quite a bit. The last point that I'll make, my boss says people, ideas, and things in that order. Some of you may have heard that. And so the people piece is critically important. We think that any success that we have had has been built on the foundation of fantastic individual Marines and civilians who have gotten after the mission, been problem solvers, innovative, and have gotten things done. And we think that's going to be the building block for all of our team's readiness over time. That's all I have.
Okay, great. Thanks, Desmond. Most importantly, I want to thank you for allowing me to have that unbelievable flashback. In 1982, I was a service battery commander, and a service battery commander was responsible for persistent engagement in all classes of supply: food, fuel, ammunition, repair parts. And I shut everything down to go to the range for a week and was told, you can't do that. How are we going to eat? How are we going to get parts? How are we going to get fuel? So I'm reminded that this persistent engagement environment is here in the cyber force. And how is it that you continue to be on mission and come off mission to stay current with the speed at which things are changing? What's that model look like, and how do we leverage technology for that? So Desmond, I'd like you to think about this as we get to this, is in a persistent engagement environment, the impacts it has on readiness, and how your new model, what that new model, some of the characteristics or traits may need to be to help the audience think about where we might be headed. Okay, Tim, please.
Well, first and foremost, on behalf of Major General Skinner, the Commander, 24th Air Force, it's my honor to represent him here at this conference. I'd like to thank AFCEA for inviting us, and also as I sit around the room, you come into the center of excellence for Army that as it relates to cyber. And I didn't know if I'd know a bunch of people, but I really need to, it would be remiss of me not to mention some legends that are in the audience right now. People that really stepped forward in the cyber regime. People like Cardone, Hernandez, Franz, Napper, and Joyce. If you don't know them, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to those people to be able, that really put things on the map of where we are in cyber today. I look at this, and also the last person, I think I see one partner here. It has been mentioned that cyber is a team sport. We absolutely cannot do this unilaterally as a country. So very much we welcome the partner discussion that goes forward that's very near and dear to my perspective here. I bring a unique perspective to this panel. One, being an operator and then into the cyber role, now working in industry and still helping, working with General Skinner. I kind of understand, I think, a little bit of how it goes back and forth. So my comments will vary a little bit different from my other colleagues. But what we're going to really talk about is where we move, where the Air Force is moving forward when it relates to training and in cyber. When we first started this thing, I thought of an Air Force analogy, and I said, well, that's going to fall over like a lead balloon, especially after lunch, right? So my feeble attempt for my Army analogy would be, in the Revolutionary War, the main weapon that we had was a musket, right? You load the bullet on the top, you shove it all the way down, you shoot them one at a time. If you're really good, maybe getting one every 20 seconds. And that's really where Cyber Command started, right? 2011, 2012 with General Alexander saying, we had some capability, you know, we could throw a big boom out there, but maybe not so much as we started to get agile. And today, this is my personal assessment. My personal assessment is we're somewhere around World War I with a Mark III rifle, right? It's good, but it still doesn't have all the ML learning that goes on that we need to get after. And so how do we continue to train and move forward in that regime is really kind of the effort that we're going to be looking forward. Just like my colleague said, the Air Force is 100% focused on readiness. It is our job not only to provide forces to Cyber Command to allow the nations to go do its mission, not only to support elections, but others, but also readiness for the Air Force. And we have some pretty unique capabilities that we're building within the Air Force that differ slightly from the other services. Be glad to talk about that in the questions piece to that. But as you build readiness, we were there in 2012, and some people were in the room. General Alexander always said that we're going to do a build, assess, build phase, right? So forever, that was what General Alexander's words. Now that Emma Rogers came through, he said, don't change the force, right? We've got to continue to get what we need to get to. Now that we're FOC in 2018, now it's time for the assessment phase, right? That's the best way I could describe that. So now that we were FOC, we were put up to the line of fully operational capable. We kind of knew what that was. We knew what the standards were. But as my colleagues have already said, the world changed underneath us at a speed and rate and tempo that we haven't seen before in other domains. So now we have to change what we are going to measure, right? And that's really what readiness is. And as we're working with Cyber Command to figure out what that readiness piece is, the day that they hand it to the services, let's step back a little bit. And after we became FOC, and as of this year, Cyber Command pushed the training requirements from Cyber Command down into the services, rightfully so. This is how we do it in every other domain. Why not do it here? We had to get it up and running. Again, it took 150 years to go from the musket to the M3, Mark III. It's only taken us 7 years to get from where we were in cyber to where we are now. But that is absolutely the right thing to go do. When you do that in the training piece, it takes some time to build through the bureaucratic process, as my colleague Des said. Once you set the marker in the sand, by the time you turn in and go, okay, let's go build that training, it's almost outdated at any given time. And for those in industry who don't really understand that, I would offer that you look back into your companies and say, if someone's spun up on a firewall, then the next firewall comes out. Maybe you switch from Palo Alto to Cisco or whatever firewall you use. Then all of a sudden, next-gen firewalls come out. And then all of a sudden, you're going to software-defined networking, and then you're going to hybrid computing, hybrid cloud computing. That's the pace of change that industry is moving. That's the pace of change that we're being reactive to a lot of times in the services. We're getting out of the reactive phase and more into the practitioner phase in the IT world. So as we start to figure out what the command needs from a Cyber Command perspective, we also look internal to the Air Force and say, what does the Air Force need? And we're going to get a little bit of that in some taskers that I want to get into industry. But one of the things that we talk about is, you know, and it was already mentioned, the right place with the right education at the right time. And so if we set a team up, does every team need to look the same? We don't know, right? I mean, that's a novel concept. You know what a fighter squadron looks like. You know what a BCT looks like. You know what carrier strike groups look like. But now when you get into the cyber team, does it always have to be, do you have to have the same skill sets in each one of the tasks that you go do? The training, as has been alluded to, hopefully you're aware of, to become an ION operator, someone that really gets on other person's network, is almost 2 years long. So do we need that many people to go do that job? We don't know, right? Well, this is things that we're exploring to be able to build multiple training programs so that you can kind of morph and swarming type of technology to kind of move into what is needed at any given time. Another thing that we clearly understood that we needed to get back to is the software programmers, the software developers. If anybody understands Python, you could clearly understand the power of Python and what it does in a cybersecurity arrangement. We've lost that skill clearly in the Air Force, and we're really looking to explore that skill with our young lieutenants and captains to be able to bring Python into an element. So you have a military uniform actually developing code as it goes through large amounts of data. That's from there. One of the things that was, as I was at Cyber Command, not always in the room, but I was at Cyber Command when they built the cyber mission force, 133 teams, 6,100 people. One of the things that was missed, I think, that you hopefully have heard before, is the command and control element to that. And so we're continually, as we look at training and we look at readiness, and our friends alluded to it, I'm just going to take it to a different way. How do you command and control the services forces that are allocated out to Cyber Command? That's not a hit on anybody, right? We were all working really hard to go do it, but just one of those realizations as you build, assess, build, this was the assess part, hey, we missed it. So we're working really hard to figure out what that is and what it means to be as we move forward into this JFHQ Air Force and how it moves forward. So much so that, much like the Army, and he did a great job of depicting on information warfare and I/O, we're looking at a multi-domain operations center or concepts. How do you take everything across the domain, not just cyber, not just ISR, but in EW? How do you morph those three together into this multi-domain operations center concept? And with that, we've actually spun it out of command and control, if you will, in that respect, an AFCEA or an MOS to translate that for Army terms, of a 13 Oscar, which will build this system of systems that move forward within the Air Force. Additionally, and I'm not going to dive too much into it, but we are building systems that are called mission defense teams. Those teams, very briefly, are all about, we talk a lot about IT systems, right? A lot of businesses work on IT systems. Well, the military doesn't work all on IT systems. We have systems of systems, right? Like in the Air Force, it's more like F-22s, the Air Operations Center system. It's F-35s, F-16s. Who's looking at those systems for cybersecurity? And I welcome questions on that to get into a little bit more of that. That's called a mission defense team that we're building as we speak. And that really gets beyond just the IP-based networks, but into the IoT-based networks and that bridge to go forward. And two totally different skill sets. Well, very different skill sets. Lastly, what I'll talk about is kind of industry. Thank you for what you do. Everything you do, as our other colleagues said, we couldn't do what we do in uniform without having support from you, so thank you for that. The challenges that we face is that every time we put out a contract, we create one program, if you will, and that program's delivered pretty much on time, pretty much on budget, and we're really happy with that program. But then it's turned over to the military member to be able to integrate that program with other programs. And that's a very difficult problem that we face. And what I'll say to that is when we had to come forward with this latest thing you might have heard of Win 10, everybody had to go to Windows 10 in DoD. In the Air Force, we went all the way across Windows 10, we made the deadline, but we couldn't really touch the program of records. So even though we understood that there was a vulnerability there, the way that we developed a relationship with you in industry kind of forced us to keep that vulnerability open, and in some cases it's still there, to be able to morph. So I would challenge you to say, how can you continually blend, not just from what you do, but how it blends into the other programs of record that either any one of the services have, to be able to ease the burden of the person trying to integrate that at the end of the day. The second part to that is, this is challenging, right? And this costs money, and I get it, right? But when you look at cars, and recently my wife and I unfortunately had just bought new cars because I had an accident with a deer, but we had to both buy cars, and one of the things that we looked at was the safety of the cars, right? Did it have an airbag? Was it 5-star rated for side flip, whatever? So we as the services in our contracting are trying to get better at offering what is a secure program to be delivered, right? You could call it supply chain risk management. You could call it secure system that you get on board. It's got a million names, but I'm just going to bridge it into this big umbrella. I've been in meetings that have said, hey, maybe we go into NIST 800-171 in each one of the contracts. We're not there yet. And in the industry friends that I've talked to, it's like, okay, well, you know how much that's going to cost. And we get that. We have to have that conversation. But wouldn't it be a differentiator for you in industry to be able to say, hey, now I am NIST 800-171 as you're competing left and right for the other parts to programs that we're moving forward. So I'll stop there. Welcome any conversations as it relates to where the Air Force is going.
Okay, Tim, great, thank you. Good Army analogy, okay, at the beginning. But for the record, I was not at the Revolutionary War. closer to World War II. The other thing that I think you bring out is, this reminder of build, assess, build. The only thing we knew when we started was that it was wrong. You never get it right the first time. And even if you were fortunate to be close, the speed at which things are changing are going to cause you to constantly have to figure out where you need to be. I'd like you to add a little bit more depth to the discussion on potential new mission sets. And I think allow us to consider what that means from a training and education standpoint with your mission teams, as well as what it might mean now with the transition from Air Force Space Command to Air Combat Command, because now you've got potentially a different lens looking at this and what types of missions might be expected of you. And again, how do you think that might have to adjust training? And then we'll kind of go through each of you and make sure you've had enough time to prepare your responses, and then we'll get into a little more discussion. Great comments by all. Rick, if I could come back to you, and I'd like you to help us better appreciate what we're learning and what potential changes there might be to training and education or skill sets as you look through the two major things you talked about, information warfare and cyber support to core and below.
Okay. I think the greatest challenge and also I think the greatest opportunity for both of those are integrating them into quote unquote the R Cyber family. We just, I think it was October, we just took quote unquote ownership of the electronic warfare branch. And so now they've been recoded from electronic warfare into a 17 series. Please don't anybody walk away and go tell CAC or General Lundy that we're taking proponency from information operations or for information operations. That's not the case. It may happen, but we're certainly not there yet. But I think that is the challenge of bringing all of those teammates together, and then doing what we've done from a cyber perspective is building a training pipeline that will produce the type of soldiers that need to conduct those types of missions. We're on our way from an EW perspective. We've got great teammates that are already building those courses, getting them integrated, and there's a fairly significant amount of growth built into the EW force going forward. And so that's definitely a good news story. We're just really starting to scratch the itch from an information operations perspective. There's roughly about 270 information operations specialists in the Army right now. And most of them don't reside in the single information operation active duty brigade in the Army, which belongs to General Fogarty. So it's about making that probably growing that capability, but also bringing them together in a way where they can actually do the things we're talking about doing at the brigade, at the corps, the division level. So those are really the challenges that we have. But again, it provides us an opportunity to put that team together in support of the maneuver commander. One thing I would also offer is because you asked me to touch on it. There's been significant benefits by the Army building a cyber branch. We've learned some great lessons, and I can tell you unequivocally, we would not be where we are today if we hadn't, from the very beginning, said, hey, we're going to go all in. We're going to build a branch. We're going to build a professional development model. It allows us to control the folks that are within. We don't have to, send them back to a basic branch or discuss with a branch, hey, can we have that person? Can we not have that person? So it allows us to do talent management, I would offer, in a much more effective way. And it's allowed us to build the pyramid that will eventually fill out the force. Those same benefits can be applied to both EW and IO as we build that out going forward.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I think there's also a lot for us to consider in determining what's needed to early on partner with industry and academia, particularly as we think about IO in the 21st century compared to what it was in the 20th century, and certainly what industry partners are already doing in that realm as well as the EW realm. So I think the opportunity for education and training, the sooner we can bring them in, I think the richer our discussions. You probably already are doing that, but I think it just leads you to a broader set of ideas.
I think we are, and I'll make that comment because I think we are, but I think we can do a better job of that. So some specific asks to both academia and industry, and I'll expand beyond the EW because it's larger than that, but it's about helping us first and foremost retrain our workforce. So if we look at where we're going from an operate, secure, and defend the network, whether it's cloud, whether it's software-defined networking, we don't have the expertise within our force to be able to do that.